I'm Yunufamai, and welcome to my lecture series on computer and network security. In this 7th video lecture, I will talk about different secure network protocols. These are protocols to securely communicate across the internet. In the first video, I will explain Wi-Fi security. And let me immediately start off with a question. To which of the following attacks are wireless networks, such as Wi-Fi, more vulnerable than wired networks? A. Man-in-the-middle attacks. B. Denial of service or DOS attacks. C. Eavesdropping attacks. D. Message injection attacks. Or E. They are not more vulnerable, so none of the above. Feel free to pause the video while you think about the answer. And let's take a look at the correct answer. The correct answer is actually all of them. Wireless networks require special attention as they are more vulnerable to attacks. And let's take a look why. And it is due to the specific characteristics of wireless networks that they are more vulnerable to specific types of attacks. First of all, wireless communication happens through the wireless channel, which is more vulnerable to eavesdropping and jamming. Because no cable is used, an attacker can place a jammer or an eavesdropping device nearby the access point or the endpoint to be able to eavesdrop on communications. Second, wireless endpoints are often mobile devices like smartphones or sensors, and these devices have limited resources compared to, for example, a server connected with a wire to the internet. This makes them more vulnerable to, for example, denial of service attacks or malware attacks. Finally, a lot of wireless devices, like a robot or a sensor, are often left unattended. This increases their vulnerability to physical tampering, as an attacker may find one of these unattended devices and physically try to hack them. And to address the security concerns with wireless networks, Wi-Fi, which was standardized by IEEE as 802.11, came with embedded features for privacy and authentication. These security features were referred to as Wired Equivalent Protection, or WEP. It uses RC4 stream cipher for confidentiality and CRC32 for integrity. However, it was not very secure, and only 4 years after it was created, it was already successfully cracked, so in 2001. By 2004, a lot of security faults were discovered in WEP, and it was advised to no longer be used. To come up with an alternative, the IEEE started standardizing new security standard for Wi-Fi, referred to as IEEE 802.11i. However, before this standard was even finished, WEP was considered no longer secure, so an initial draft of the standard was turned into Wi-Fi Protected Access, or WPA, which was the new security standard for Wi-Fi. It uses RC4 stream ciphers as well, but the Temporal Key Integrity Protocol, or TKIP, on top of that. When in 2004 IEEE 802.11i was fully standardized and finished, it was turned into a new version of WPA, WPA2, also referred to as Robust Security Network, or RSN. Instead of RC4, it uses stronger AES encryption for confidentiality. Recently, in 2018, a third version of WPA was created called WPA3. It updated the used cryptography algorithms to make them stronger, so using bigger keys. And it also uses a better key exchange algorithm that addresses some of the vulnerabilities present in WPA and WPA2. It is referred to as simultaneous authentication of equals, or SAE. And as I mentioned, WEP is considered insecure, and it was cracked already in 2001 by Fleur, Martin, and Shamir, and their attack was referred to by their initials FMS. It is a passive attack that discovers the RC4 key used for encryption in WEP. It does not rely on a specific vulnerability of RC4 itself, but on the method used by Wi-Fi to derive the session key. And it basically reconstructs this key by listening on encrypted messages that are exchanged between the stations. As such, the speed to crack the key depends on how much traffic is transmitted over the network, and if enough traffic is transmitted, it can be as low as a few minutes. Since then, other attacks have been devised that improve upon FMS to reduce the time needed to find the key, such as, for example, Codec and PTW. In the meantime, also, software has been developed to easily crack WEP security, such as AirCrack-NG. It is a network software suite for cracking Wi-Fi security. It can be used with any wireless network interface controller that supports monitoring of raw packets, and it implements, among others, FMS, as well as several other known attacks against WEP and WPA. As such, it is clear that WP should not be used, as anyone can install the software and crack the WEP security. Since a lot of security vulnerabilities are known against WEP and also the first draft of WPA, let's take a closer look at WPA2, which is considered more secure. It provides three main security services: access control, authentication, and confidentiality. First, access control. We talked about access control in previous videos already. Its main goal is to ensure that a user that is authenticated can only access the network resources to which they are authorized. For access control, the IEEE 802.1 port-based access control protocol is used, which I explained in previous videos. For authentication and the generation and exchange of keys, the Extensible Authentication Protocol, or EAP, is used, which I also explained previously already. Finally, confidentiality also includes authentication of the origin of the data, integrity of the data, and protection against replay attacks. And it can be provided by two alternatives. First is TKIP, or Temporal Key Integrity Protocol, and second is CCMP, or Counter Mode with Cipher Blockchaining MAC protocol. And let's take a closer look at the different specific algorithms that are used for confidentiality, integrity, and key generation. For confidentiality, WPA2 can use RC4 when using TKIP mode, or AES with counter mode when using CCMP. Moreover, the NIST key rep standard is used for the confidentiality of the exchanged session keys. For integrity, different message authentication codes are used, such as, for example, HMAC based on SHA-1 or MD5, and also MAC based on AES. Finally, for key generation, HMAC SHA-1, so SHA-1 hashing can be used, or RFC 1750. And let's take a closer look at the different steps that occur in a WPA2 session. The actors involved are the station, which is an end device like a laptop or a phone, the access point, or AP, the authentication server, or AS, and another end station to which the station wants to communicate. In practice, the authentication server could be embedded into the access point. There are four main phases in total, plus, of course, the fifth phase, which is termination of the connection. First phase is discovery, where the station tries to discover the available networks and the security features that they provide. Second is authentication, where the access point and station mutually authenticate with each other. Consequently, there is the key management, where keys are generated and exchanged. And finally, in the fourth phase, there is protected data transfer, where the exchanged session keys are used to securely exchange data and provide confidentiality, integrity, replay protection, and so on. And let's take a closer look at each of the 4 phases of a WPA2 session, starting with phase 1, discovery. In this phase, the station and the access point will discover each other's existence and exchange information about what security features they support. In the first step, the station can either send a probe request to discover access points, or the station can listen for broadcast messages which contain information about the access points to discover them. So both options are possible. The access point will send a probe response with possible security parameters, such as security capabilities, the security policy in use, what algorithms it supports, and so on. In the second step, there is an open system authentication. This does not serve any security purposes, but it is for backwards compatibility, because in old versions of 802.11, this was required, and the hardware that performs the different 802.11 protocol tasks still requires it. So it's for backwards compatibility. In the third step, the station will send an association request to associate with the access point and be able to send data over the network. In the association response, the access point can add authentication and key management information, pairwise cipher, group key cipher suite, and so on. So this is information about the different security algorithms that can be used for authentication, for encryption of unicast traffic, which is the pairwise cipher, and encryption of multicast traffic, which is the group key cipher. And as I said, the access point and station will negotiate during phase 1 which algorithms, in this case referred to as suites, to use for encryption, so confidentiality, integrity, and key management and authentication. And there are different possibilities that have been defined in the WPA2 standard. The first one are the pairwise and group key cipher suites. These define confidentiality and integrity protocols together with the key length. There are 4 possible methods. The first one is for backwards compatibility, which is the same method used in WEP, so with a key of 40 or 104 bits. Obviously, this method is not very secure. Second is, as I mentioned already, the temporal key integrity protocol, or TKIP. The third one is the counter mode with cipher block chaining MAC protocol, or CCMP, which I also mentioned. And the fourth one is a vendor-specific method that could be implemented by on the equipment of specific vendors, but obviously may not be supported by equipment of other vendors. Second is the Authentication and Key Management Suite, or AKM. It defines how the station and the access point will mutually authenticate and how they will generate keys. There are different possible methods, 3 to be specific. The first one is based on EAP and 802.1x, so port-based network access control and extensible authentication protocol. The second one is based on a pre-shared key, and authentication is implied if both station and access point know the secret key. And third is again a vendor-specific method that can be implemented. And that brings us to phase 2, namely the authentication of the station. As I said, authentication can happen in 2 ways. In case a pre-shared key is used, all of these steps are omitted. Pre-shared keys are most often used in private networks, while enterprise networks more often use authentication using the 802.1x protocol, which is shown here. In this case, the station acts as a supplicant, the access point as the authenticator, and additionally there is an authentication server present. The way this works is very similar to what I already explained in a previous video where I talked about network access control. So, at the start, the controlled ports of the network are blocked. This means that the station will not be able to use certain network resources, like for example, transmit or receive data from across the internet. In this phase, the access point will send an EAP request the station will respond, and an access request will be sent to the authentication server. Then the station has to be authenticated using the extensible authentication protocol. As I explained before, any of the EAP authentication methods can be used, so this is very flexible and different methods are available. If the authentication is successful, the access point will generate the master session key and deliver it to the station. At this point, the control ports are still blocked, and they will only be unblocked after the temporal keys, so the session keys, are installed on both the station and the access point. And at the end of the second phase, authentication, the station and the access point either share a pre-shared key or a master session key that they just negotiated. Using either of these two keys, they can then start creating the session keys used for communication, for secure communication. So from the pre-shared key or the master session key, they derive a 256-bit pairwise master key. This pairwise master key is converted using a pseudo-random function such as hmac SHA-1 into a longer pairwise transient key. This is done during a procedure called the four-way handshake. This pairwise transient key is either 384 bits when using CCMP or 512 bits when using TKIP. And this one is split into three separate keys. A key confirmation key, which is used to encrypt control traffic and is 128 bits long. A key encryption key, which is used to encrypt other cryptographic keys, which is also 128 bits long. And a temporal key, which can be 128 or 256 bits, which is used to encrypt data traffic. In addition to the pairwise keys, which are used for unicast communication between a single station and an access point, the access point also needs keys for multicast traffic, where the data is sent to multiple stations at the same time. In this case, obviously, these stations that want to receive the data need to share that key, so the procedure to generate it is different. The group keys are generated by the access point and then shared with all the stations that are part of the multicast group to which the key belongs. Whenever a station leaves the group or the key is compromised, the access point will generate a new key and share that with the remaining stations in the multicast group. And the different keys that I mentioned are exchanged using a so-called four-way handshake between the station and the access point. At the start of the four-way handshake, before exchanging the first message, the station and access point will already share a pairwise master key obtained during authentication. Then the first message is sent where the access point will send a nonce called a nonce to the station. The station can use this nonce as well as another nonce called s nonce that it generates and the pairwise master key to create the pairwise temporal key using a pseudo-random function. The station can then derive from the pairwise transient key all the other keys that it needs. And it will send message 2, which is contains a message authentication code, which we refer to in this context as a MIC, not a MAC, which stands for Message Integrity Code, to avoid confusion with MAC protocols or media access protocols, media access control protocols that are also a term used in Wi-Fi. This MIC is calculated using HMAC with SHA-1, and the message is created using the key confirmation key or key CK. The access point will then receive s nonce back and will be able to generate the pairwise transient key itself without ever sending it over the network. This avoids man-in-the-middle attacks and allows then both the access point and the station to derive all the keys needed. The access point will then send another message to the station to say that the pairwise transit key has been successfully installed. Finally, the station will send as a response message 4, which ends the four-way handshake. Although it doesn't serve any security purposes, it ensures that all the messages have been successfully received and the keys have been successfully installed. At that point, 2021X will release or unblock the controlled ports to allow unicast communication between the station and the access point. At that point also the group keys will be installed. So the group temporal key will be sent to the station by the access point, and then the station will send back a second message to acknowledge that message 1 was successfully achieved and the group temporal key can be installed. The fourth and final phase is the protected data transfer. Once all the keys have been successfully exchanged, the station and access point can start to securely exchange data. As I mentioned, there are two main possibilities. The first one is Temporal Key Integrity Protocol, or TKIP. TKIP was designed to be hardware compatible with devices that support WEP. It only requires a software update. As such, its main purpose is backwards compatibility and the ability to keep using hardware designed for WEP with new software. It provides integrity and confidentiality. Integrity with a 64-bit message integrity code, which uses an algorithm called Michael, and confidentiality using the RC4 stream cipher. To increase security, WPA2 also defines a new protocol for protected data exchange called the Counter Mode CBC MAC protocol, or CCMP. It is for newer devices and requires new hardware, so it's not backwards compatible with WEP hardware. And it uses the CBC MAC for integrity and the counter mode of AES 128 for confidentiality. And here you see how the pairwise temporal key is used for CCMP and TKIP. So in CCMP, only the first 128 bits are used. For AES, and this key is used both for integrity and confidentiality, while for TKIP, first two 64-bit keys are used for the Michael protocol, for Michael algorithm for integrity, and then the remaining 64 128 bits are used for RC4. And throughout the year, several attacks have been discovered against WPA and WPA2 security. First one is a straightforward dictionary or brute force attack, where weak or predictable pre-shared keys can be guessed by an attacker. This is a common problem because many people use a very vulnerable password for their Wi-Fi network, and these are therefore easy to guess with a dictionary attack. A truly random 20-character passphrase selected from the 95 permitted characters always provides the best protection. Second are attacks specifically to WPA TKIP. Remember, TKIP is backwards compatible, hardware compatible with WEP, and therefore some attacks that work against WEP also work against TKIP. For example, in 2013, Van Hoeven and Piessens, two researchers at KU Leuven in Belgium, demonstrated an attack that can inject arbitrary packets with a payload of at most 112 bytes into the communication. TKIP is also currently deemed insecure, but still in wide use. So if you configure your Wi-Fi network, make sure to use the more modern CCMP. Also in 2017, the same Van Hoof demonstrated the so-called key reinstallation attack, or crack, which forces a key and a nonce to be reused by repeating messages 3 and 4 of the handshake procedure of WPA2. This figure shows how the crack attack actually works. So here you can see the four-way handshake where the supplicant or the station and the authenticator or the access point exchange information. And crack is actually a man-in-the-middle attack where an adversary is positioned in the middle between the two communicating parties. Specifically, the man in the middle will intercept message 4 of the four-way handshake. That means that after message 3, the station thinks the pairwise temporal key and group temporal key are successfully installed and will start transmitting data. However, the access point will never receive message 4, so after some time, after a timeout, it will resend message 3. When resending message 3, the station will reinstall the pairwise temporal key and will start reusing the same nonces that were already used before for the previous data packets. And by reusing the nonces and using the same key again, an attacker can potentially decrypt data, especially if part of the plaintext is known. For example, known header fields that the attacker can derive, and reuse of nonces can allow an attacker to obtain more information and actually decrypt the data. So this shows the danger of the crack attack. As I mentioned, in 2018, IEEE and the Wi-Fi Alliance came up with a new security standard for Wi-Fi, referred to as WPA3. WPA3 uses similar phases as WPA2, but provides some improvements. The first and most important improvement is replacement of the handshake procedure with a new procedure called Simultaneous Authentication of Equals, or SAE. It is based on the Dragonfly handshake, which is standardized in the IETF RFC 7664 document, and it provides better protection against offline dictionary attacks, to which networks with vulnerable or weak pre-shared keys are very vulnerable. Moreover, it offers forward secrecy, which means that if an attacker learns the password at some point, they cannot use that password to decrypt old messages that they have intercepted. This is very important because this allows the station and access point to negotiate a new key when the key leaks without running the risk of all old messages being decrypted. On top of that, it provides 3 other important improvements. The first one is better support for security configuration on devices without a display. This is important, for example, for IoT sensors. This feature is called Device Provisioning Protocol, or DPP, and it replaces WPS, which was insecure. Second or third is the authenticated encryption that protects open Wi-Fi networks against passive eavesdropping attacks, such as, for example, a lot of public hotspots which do not have a WPA protection at all. So now these networks have some form of protection. This protection is not very strong and will not work against active attacks, but will work against eavesdropping. And finally, WPA3 supports more modern encryption algorithms with increased key sizes, such as AES GCM 256 and HMAC SHA 384. This ends my video on Wi-Fi security. In the next videos, I will talk about other secure network protocols such as TLS and SSH.